Today we're building a gigantic dingo habitat to fill out the Australian section in Naturalis in Plan Zoo. So before we get started, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button if you want to see more. Now, let's go wild. Alright, so strap in because this is going to be a long one. And there's multiple things that I want to talk about. I mean, of course I can't not talk about Planet Coaster 2. Then there's also things happening mid-August that need to be mentioned. But first, let's talk about the actual habitat and the structure, because yes, this structure, it's basically a complete circle, which for me is a very easy thing to build. However, the snapping point of that circle was just a bit off. Because usually I set the snapping point to just like 1 meter or 1 times, I think it is. But for this structure, it needed to be half a meter. Because the center point, or the middle, where if you would cut the building in half, you would have 2 symmetrical sides. Yeah, that middle point was, instead of on like the nice snapping point of 1, was on a half. So everything that snapped would just not snap correctly, and I would constantly have to change every small bit, which isn't that difficult, it was just very tedious. So every little bit, like the walls and such, I would need to make sure like, oh, is this properly aligned? And then there was the nightmare of the guest area, or the guest viewing area, because I wanted to have a indoor guest viewing area. Because the Netherlands can get quite warm. I mean, today it's quite warm, it's 30 degrees, so if halfway through this voiceover I get completely loopy, it's because the sun is trying to kill me. Or, well, the heat. The sun not that much because it's now cloudy, but yeah. Anyways, so it can get warm, and also it's the Netherlands. 90% of the time it's rainy or grey. So you want to have a place where you can go inside. And I thought like, oh yeah, the dingo habitat is going to be a very nice place here, because it's in this circle, so any indoor section could really nicely flow into the pathway. So wanted to do that. So here's the thing, when it comes to the paths, I always use the angle snapping so that it's always like the same angle, the same rotation and such. And on the outside of a path like this, you would have nice places where like the paths would actually kind of snap if you wanted to add like a T-junction, I think you call it. Well, not on the inside. So when it came to the paths, I just had to guess like, alright, this is kind of where it needs to be for the entrances. Eventually I just decided, alright, because I'm going to have to deal with curbs, because all of the paths in the Australian section are on this walkway, because I wanted this like beach boardwalk walkway vibe throughout the entirety of the Australian section. But because of that, I have to deal with curbs. So when it comes to any structures where there's spotting going inside, I also need to think of like, alright, how am I going to hide the curbs? Because usually structures, or at least indoor areas, don't really have curbs for the paths. So my solution was, let's just make the paths gigantic, and let's use the security barriers that guests can't walk over to kind of give the idea that the spot is actually smaller than it is. We're basically just like faking the path in a way. Like the path is really there, but the path is bigger than it actually appears to be. Like I think the entire indoor section is just a giant path. But because of the barriers, like the security barriers, the guests can't actually walk through certain things. So like the doors, they can walk through the open section of the door, but not on like the windows. There's also like a planter that's partially there to hide the curb, because even if the indoor section is like a giant path, there's still going to be curves, because it's a path going off another path. It can't really easily just become a giant square. So I had to hide a few curbs, but the planter that I used is round, the curb wasn't round, so part of the parts, say that 3 times fast, but part of the pot went inside of that planter, so I had to use the security barriers to make sure that the guests wouldn't walk through the planter, which, come to think of it, is really ridiculous because when am I ever going to let guests into Naturalis? Funnily enough, I thought like, oh, what's happened? Like, Naturalis is working really badly, like there's so much lag. I don't know how. Like, really don't. Well, actually, I kinda, now that I think about it, I might know why. But all of the climbing stuff was turned on, which I think is a result of the dark days of the hard drive failure. You know, when we had to battle with the power outage, but the casualty was the hard drive that got fried in the battle. We won the war, but we lost many friends along the way. But yeah, I think because the hard drive got fried, then the save that I had to go back to hadn't already turned off all of that. Because throughout Naturalis, only the areas where I have like a climbing animal, so the koala habitat, the Amur leopard habitat, like any habitat where there's climbing, that's also the only areas where the climbing is turned on. Because if you turn it off for the majority of your zoo will run a lot better, because your game doesn't have to like do the maths and figure out all of the routes for the climbing. The game only has to figure out the climbing for that small section. But yes, I think that because the hard drive failed, because I had to revert back to an earlier save, I most likely in that save hadn't turned that off yet. And so my game was starting to get very laggy. Now it's all turned off again, because I don't need the Planet Zoo peeps to try and climb the buildings outside of the zoo. Oh, that would be funny if they tried to climb it. I mean, when it came to the alpaca habitat, they climbed walls, so if you make your zoo a giant petting zoo, they will climb your buildings probably, or they will try to. Yeah, I didn't turn it on long enough to see if they actually climbed the buildings that I built in that habitat. Anyways, so yeah, this habitat, this build made me realize a lot of things. Especially how much the potting system in Plant Zoo can be a chore. Now, here's a spicy opinion. I don't think that the potting system in Plant Zoo is bad. You definitely need to get used to it. But it's not awful. And if you know how to use it, it's actually quite easy. And otherwise, be good at building and hiding all of the curbs, because that's what I do. Like a lot of the times it's just like, alright, I like the custom parts, and also that's a good way to be able to hide curves that I don't want to be able to, or don't want to be on display. All of the custom parts I could just hide the curbs. Well, most of the parts are also on ground level and not raised like here in the Australian section, which is definitely was a mistake on my part. Like, the curbs, I hate. The potting system in general I like. It's just the curbs that just... I wish I could turn them off for the raised sections, because it would make it so much easier. And yes, I could probably try and use mods, but so far Naturalis has been mod free, except for like the Lion remaster, which I now can't even use because during the dark times the lions got vaporized as well. Although I of course want to add the lions in again. I also want to add hippos. There's this one area in the African section next to all of the habitats that I'm really proud of. Yeah, there's that one area where I constantly am like, I want to add the hippos here, but the hippos require so much space. This area needs a smaller animal. I already used the penguin somewhere else. There's the dwarf hippo. Maybe we're going to have dwarf hippos and not the full-sized hippos, because full-sized hippos are large. Also very dangerous, but I think I've already said that once. Like, sometimes I say things and I realize after I've done the full voiceover that I'm like, I definitely talked about that in another video already. Oops. Because my brain just goes on autopilot when I'm making these voiceovers, and sometimes my brain then feeds me the same talking points as in like a video 5 videos ago. Yeah, my brain is just weird. I'm also a giant idiot, so that doesn't help with things. Anyways, back to the actual building. So yeah, the guest area for the dingo habitat was definitely just like the most trying. It wasn't difficult. However, it did annoy me in a way that, like, I have a very perfectionistic brain. I don't think that comes as a surprise. But because of that, I want everything to be like nicely symmetrical or nicely like lined out and have all of the mat be working. And here it's like, those doors are definitely not symmetrical. They are there and give the appearance of symmetry, but most likely one of those doors is, well, both of them are not correctly aligned, so that one of the doors is like slightly more to the left compared to the other, or vice versa, where it's like slightly more to the right, and it annoys me. And that's why I love using the mud brick columns and the snapping tools, because they make things nicely lined out, and that gives my brain peace. Anyways, other things about the building. So when it came to the actual sleeping area for the dingoes, I realized, yeah, this doesn't need to be as big as like for the koalas, where the koalas, if you remove the outdoor area, they would still be fine because of the size of the indoor area. With the dingoes, it was just like, yeah, they don't actually, like, even in the middle of winter in the Netherlands, the dingoes would probably still be, well, maybe not perfectly happy, but they would still be able to go outside and such. So basically it was just like, alright, I can make a smaller building for them here. And then it was just looking like, alright, I need to build something that's completely round here. And then I came across this building with basically this, how do you call it, sloping inwards roof, that I was just like, yeah, this is going to work. Like, it's not too much out there, because this is going to be right before or right in front of the big building, the big indoor building where I'm planning to have like the platypus and the waka, which I feel like I'm definitely not pronouncing correctly, but basically the big indoor area for all of the more like sensitive animals. Sensitive isn't the correct word, but it's like for the animals that definitely wouldn't be in an outdoor area outside of Australia. And like platypus are, I think, very well known that they are almost never in any zoo outside of Australia, because they're like, transporting them is just so difficult, because they would like die on transport or something like that. And then you would need to have like a perfect habitat for them, because otherwise other things happen. And I want to have platypus. I don't want to say the multitude of that, because that sounds wrong. Basically, I want those animals in Planet Zoo. Well, in Naturalis, we have them in Planet Zoo, but I want them in Naturalis, but I also want to be kind of realistic. So that means, yes, they are not going to have an outdoor area. They are just going to be completely indoors in an area or in a habitat that mimics their real life habitat, like that. And speaking of realistic, let's talk about Planet Coaster 2, because yeah, I can't not talk about Planet Coaster 2. It's like it's such a big thing. Now, am I going to abandon Naturalis for Planet Coaster 2? I constantly want to say Planet Zoo 2 because we're building in Planet Zoo right now. But am I going to abandon Planet Zoo or Naturalis for Planet Coaster? Nope. I hope not. I mean, we will see what my brain does, because it was also not my intention to abandon Planet Coaster for Planet Zoo, but then we all know what happened. Well, I mean, when it came to Planet Coaster, my project there was Steanopolis, which, if you remember it, you also remember that the frame rate at the end was horrible, and I practically was just like, I can't build in this. Anytime I play something down, I have to wait 5 minutes. So, yeah, hope that doesn't happen with Naturalis. Probably not. For a reason that I will also discuss later. But when it comes to Planet Coaster 2 and like Naturalis, what's going to be the future? Again, this all ties into what I was going to talk about later. But basically, right now I am storing a lot of videos, or I'm trying to build as much as possible so that I have like a storage of videos, so that if I'm not feeling to build Planet Zoo in a week where Planet Coaster is out, well, in a week, that sounds wrong. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, if there's like a week after Planet Coaster comes out where I really want to build a Planet Coaster and I don't feel really like building a Planet Zoo, then I have like videos still set, and then going forward I can like add to that storage of videos that I'm like hopefully like 2-3 videos ahead of what you guys know, so that if it ever happens that like, oh, this week I'm not feeling like building in Planet Zoo, that there's still Naturalis for you guys, and that Naturalis still gets worked on, because eventually it will always happen that like, oh, I feel like Planet Zoo again. So there's that. And another reason why I'm storing videos is, well, I need to discuss this now, is I've got a job. I'm starting mid-August, which means that there's going to be less time for me to work on Planet Zoo, which again relates into, oh, I'm storing videos now in case things happen. Because I think I've mentioned this previously already, that like, oh, I was looking for a job and it's like really stressful, and especially stressful when you have like 3 job interviews in a day. Yeah. In a way, the interviews itself were not stressful, it was just that they were so draining that like afterwards I had 0 energy, because you're of course trying to present the best version of yourself at those interviews, which for me was just weirdly draining, because I don't like talking about myself like, oh, I'm really good at this and this and this, and I just got all like, yeah, you need to really show, oh, you're really good at this and that. But I don't like talking about myself like that. I'm just like, yeah, I'm good at that, but it's not that big of a deal. I literally got told, Poison, a job interview is the last place where you want to be really humble. So, yes, eventually after all of that, I secured a job starting mid-August. That's the most I'm going to tell about my job. Like, I'm not going to tell where I work, for who, nothing like that, because I actually even said this in a job interview of like, oh yeah, I do YouTube, but I keep it as separate from my real life as possible. Like, there's YouTube Poison, and then there's IRL Poison, and I'm trying to make sure that those two that there's not any, well, basically to set up strong boundaries between like, oh yeah, this is YouTube, this is IRL, and I would like to keep those two separate. So that's the reason. And then there's also, of course, like doxing, because internet is weird and there's always scary people on the internet. So yeah, basically all I'm going to say is I've got a job starting mid-August, and from mid-August on, scheduling might be kind of weird, because of course there's the less time for me to work on builds, but then there might also be like a few weeks after mid-August where I need to settle into the role and such, and basically just like, yeah, I might be there like a few weeks that's just a little bit off because I'm really tired from working or anything like that. So yeah, that's a general update, which again ties into I am trying to build as much as possible right now so that I have a storage of videos that even if I am not building for whatever reason, there's still videos. Funnily enough, hopefully, Planet Coaster, because they said, oh, it's going to release in fall. I really hope it's not September or like October. I really hope it's November, because by that point, I'm like fully settled in, and I know like, oh, this is how much time I can spend on this without completely exhausting myself because I have to work. So yeah, let's hope that it releases in November or end October. Yeah, this is one of the first times where it's like, oh yeah, game releases, I want it to be as late as possible. November is still fall. Part of it, I think. Yay! Anyway, so there's that. And then I've also to go back into Planet Coaster. I actually put it out for a poll because I was thinking like, oh, am I going to go full fantasy or full realism for Planet Coaster 2? And I for the longest was just like, oh yeah, it's going to probably be full fantasy because that's like my comfort zone. And then somebody mentioned, hey, why don't you do a bit of both? And the reason why I didn't put that in the poll was because I was scared that I was basically going to be replicating Disney. Yeah, I'm an idiot because my favorite park, which is also like the biggest theme park in the Netherlands, is the Efteling. If you haven't visited the Efteling, you're really missing out on just life. Like, get it together. Visit the Efteling. But basically, the Efteling is, well, besides it is a theme park, so I don't know why I said besides. Again, it's 30 degrees right now. Like, it's really hot. I am melting because I am like the wicked witch of what do you call it, the West? What's the witch in Oz? But like, I don't melt with water, I melt with heat. Like, if it's above 25 degrees, I just start melting. Like, I don't want to go anywhere near the Mediterranean right now. Like, a lot of people, they're like, oh yeah, well, in Europe, if you're living in America, and well, I would assume that you wouldn't immediately go to the Mediterranean for a summer holiday, but here in Europe, it's basically a very frequent thing of like, oh yeah, we're just going to drive to like Italy or Spain or Greece or south of France or something like for a holiday. Or at least it was frequent. I don't know how it's now. But yeah, basically that's a frequent holiday destination. And I'm just like, no. I want to go to the northernmost bits of Scandinavia. I'm not talking about the south of Norway or Finland or Sweden. Denmark, go out, go away. I am talking about the northernmost point of like Scandinavia, like the northernmost points of Norway. Because I can't handle the heat. I would rather live in the cold because then I can dress up in a suit all day, every day. It's the thing of like, oh yeah, you can take or put on as many layers as you want to combat the cold. You can only take just a few layers off when it's hot before you're just naked. And then you can't really do that everywhere because, yeah, public nudity is... let's not do that. So, yeah, I would rather live in the north of Norway. Or, like, let's go even better. Like, let's just go to the North Pole. Or Antarctica. Like, I would do fine with the polar bears and the penguins. I know that those are two different continents, but I'm willing to accept both. Because, first, no mosquitoes there. I really don't like mosquitoes. Not because they bite, it's just because of the sound. Something in me is just like, whenever I hear that sound, I am just wide awake and I will murder it. But I mean, I would do very well as Santa's neighbor. I would get all the presents. Like, no presents for you guys. I would just steal all of Santa's presents. Before anyone asks, no, I don't believe in Santa. Santa's not real. If you're watching this as a child who believes in Santa, sorry for you, but I've said much worse things. So if a child under the age of like 13 is watching this, where are your parents? I've said much worse things. I've built brothels and such. So probably shouldn't be watching this. Anyways, what was I talking about again? Oh yeah, I was talking about like Santa, Norway, and gold. Again, just the gold is amazing. Because you can dress up whatever, however you like. It just has to be warm. Whenever it's summer and it's like over 30 degrees, it's just like, yeah, I think I'm going to die now. Like, I'm fine with that. It's too hot anyway. But anyway, so back to Planet Coaster talk, because I started talking about, oh yeah, Planet Coaster. This is why I want it later. Oh yeah, the work, and then I went back to Planet Coaster, only to go on to a completely different tangent about me not being able to survive in the Mediterranean right now. Barely be able to survive in the Netherlands, even though actually tomorrow it's back to 20 degrees. This is Dutch weather for you. Today it's 30, tomorrow it's 20, and it's raining tomorrow. Have fun! Anyway, so back to Planet Coaster. So I wanted to first not do a mixed version of like fantasy and realism, because I thought like for some reason the only thing that I could think of was like, I don't want to build like Disney. And then I realized, oh yeah, there is the Efteling. But here's the thing, the Efteling also deals with fairy tales, and I didn't want to do fairy tales. Well, then we can do myths and folk tales and such. Well, what am I going to name that then? And I was just doing, like, playing a completely different game, even though I should be playing Plant Zoo and get that storage created of videos and builds. But I was playing a completely different game, and I was just like, oh yeah, I need to name this city Mythos. Myths, Mythos. Works in Dutch, works in English, and I actually looked it up because to this day I still occasionally get the comment of like, hey, do you know that Naturalis is also a museum in the Netherlands? Not that I'm mad about that, but I don't want to draw any connection to real life stuff because it's Naturalis. Well, not because it's Naturalis. Again, my brain is totally fried today, but like, I just want something that's completely my own, basically. So I looked up Mythos parks. Are there any theme parks with the name Mythos? There's a small theme park in Greece. Well, I think it's Greece because it's about Greek mythology, but from what I read, it's like a theme park, but it's also a museum because there's no, as far as I saw, real attractions there. It's more like a tour throughout like settings about Greek mythology, I think. So I was just like, yeah, that's probably small enough that nobody's going to point it out. Probably, but then I also thought like, oh yeah, who's going to point out Naturalis? And then I occasionally still get those comments. Again, I have nothing against like Naturalis not being a completely original, even though I thought it was an original because I was just like, oh yeah, nature. Let's just put is at the back of it. To make it sound nice, let's put an L between that. Naturalis. And then that was actually a real building. Well, real museum. Which to me is just always is just hilarious. They're like, oh yeah, I thought that this was completely original. No, it wasn't, Poison. So now I'm just like, alright, Mythos, it's probably the only name that really works because the other name that I thought of was like, oh yeah, Fantasia. That's a Disney movie, I think. Also, there's Fantasia Park or Fantasia Land. I think it's Fantasia. Fantasia. Now I can't say Fantasia anymore, but there's also a park in Germany that's called that, which is actually a theme park. So I was just like, yeah, that's not going to work. Yeah, we're just going Mythos then, because that's a small theme park in Greece, which is more of a museum, so it's... But yeah, so we're going to be building Mythos in Planet Coaster 2, because then I can do like all of the things with like myths and mythology, folktales and everything, which to me sounds great. And then veering with the styling more towards Efteling, which is a little bit more, like, people say it's grim. For me, it's like very comforting, very happy, very, you know, great, you know. And it's not really grim and dark, as some people might describe it as. And then I realized, yeah, that could also be nostalgia talking, because I've been going through the Efteling since I was a child. And then most of the time when people describe it as like, oh, it's grim and it's a little bit dark, it's usually people who haven't grown up with it. So I can definitely see how it could be grim and dark. But yeah, definitely venturing more towards that style. So yeah, hopefully in November or late October, we're going to be building Mythos. And if anyone claims that name right now, I will sue your ass until the end. I will sue your ass into the voids, where also my hard drive is located. If you find it, can you please bring it back? Well, actually, don't bring it back because it's dead. So, yeah. I'm not going to sue anyone. If anyone takes that seriously, no, I'm not. If you can build Mythos as well, my project is then also going to be named Mythos. Have fun. Anyways, back to the actual building. So just to recap, because that was a gigantic chaos. So, Planet Coaster 2, hopefully it's going to be October, November. First time that I want a game release to be later. But because of Planet Coaster 2, and probably like my attention span going towards that for a bit as well, and because me starting to work in August, I'm going to be trying to build as much as possible so that what you're going to see when a video gets released is actually, well, I'm going to be 2 weeks ahead, hopefully. This is, again, all hopefully. Like, I have 4 weeks to build as much of a storage as possible, so that if things happen and like maybe I don't have the energy to make videos, I still have a video for you guys to see. So there's that thing. Starting work in August, Planet Coaster, hopefully it comes out later, because then I'm fully acclimatized, or words, basically I'm fully used to my job then, and hopefully we'll then have figured out how to manage the scheduling and everything. But it can also fully happen that starting August, the schedule is just going to be all over the place. We will see. I say schedule, I never had a schedule. But we will see about that. Anyways, now let's talk about the actual build again, because I spent so much time talking about random shit that I basically lost track of the build. So when it comes to the build, we've already built all of the fences, we've built the keeper entrance, which I wanted to mimic the fences, but here's the thing, when it comes to the fences and everything, I always look up, alright, how high can the animal jump? So for koalas, that was like 1.5 meters, for dingoes it's around 2 meters that they can jump from a standing position. So everything needed to be at least 2 meters. Now when it came to the habitat, that was easy because, well, you just dig a trench. If the trench is 3 meters deep from the top of the fence, the dingo won't be able to jump it. Hopefully. Here's again the thing, I don't do full realism, I just do an attempt at realism. It can fully well be the thing that the dingoes will be able to jump it. But I try to make the moats and the fences and such a size that it's logical that they won't be able to jump it, but then realism sometimes works other ways. And then there was the nightmare viewing area. Now I'm not talking about the indoor viewing area because that one is done by this point, that's old news. I'm talking about the outdoor viewing area because I wanted to have like a ground level section where the path goes down and you have a better view of the dingoes. That gets you a little bit closer to it and all of it that. However, the issue here is that this had basically 3 snapping points. 3 mud brick pillars were needed to make this curve. Because going from the stairs to about 1/3 of the way, it was one curve. Then from the other side, the same thing, of course, so there was again another curve. But then the middle section where these 2 curves would connect was also a different curvature. So that was fun. In the end, you can definitely, if you look at it closely, you can see where the 3 curves meet each other. But I tried to blend it out as much as possible, but you will also see in the background 3 mud brick pillars. Funnily enough, the mud brick pillar to the left handles the right curvature. The mud brick pillar to the right handles the left curvature. If that makes sense. So it was a little bit confusing. But anyways, then we're also building a wheelchair elevator. Or a lift. Now I initially did want to make one with a roof. But because this is such a small area, and because I wanted this wheelchair elevator lift to be as unassuming as possible, I decided to go for a pretty standard wheelchair lift, like when it came to the design and such. This, as far as I could find, is one of the most standard designs for a wheelchair lift. And then I decided, alright, I'm going to do that. Because it's set in where I actually want kind of a garden, it's like going to be in the middle of the garden. Because it's so unassuming, the garden works with it and the wheelchair lift works with the garden. And yes, I already said like, oh yeah, it's going to be in the middle of the garden. Usually I attach like the wheelchair or the wheelchair ramps, the wheelchair lifts, or the disability ramp. Like I'm always like hesitant to say like, oh, wheelchair lift, because it's also for those people who are just like, saying just even makes it sound bad, but like people have like less mobility, or for the elderly and such. So I always feel hesitant calling it just like, oh, it's a wheelchair lift, because also like the elderly are able to use it. The people who have other reasons why they would need to use it can use it. Now I'm not saying, oh, I'm tired, I'm going to be able to use it. That's not a legitimate reason. You can use the stairs. If you have a legit medical reason, I mean. But yeah, I'm always just kind of hesitant to say like, oh yeah, wheelchair lift, because it's also for other people. Like you don't have to be in a wheelchair to be able to use this. Please let me know what like the correct way of saying everything is, because for some reason disability lift sounds incorrect grammarly, like it doesn't sound like a correct word. But that might just be because I'm so unfamiliar with it, because I have no one in like my direct environment who does need to use this that I could like easily speak to. So yeah, if I'm ever saying anything wrong when it comes to disabilities, wheelchair lifts, I'm going to call it right now. But if there's like any wording where it could be more proper, please let me know, because I don't know, I'm an idiot when it comes to that. But yeah, then let's move on to some shades, because yeah, we need some more shades. I mean, I've already talked, it's 30 degrees right now, the sun is just burning, but Naturalis doesn't really have much shade besides trees, so I needed to have some shades in. Well, Naturalis has a few points where you have sun shade. Most of them, funnily enough, are in the African section. Although when it came to like the central area, there's just a lot more trees in that area. So there's a lot more shade because of that. Although I do still want to add a lot more trees to Naturalis. Like, I want the feeling that if you walk through Naturalis, that you are walking through nature and not just through like asphalt and paths and like the occasional planter with some flowers and bushes. I really want it to feel like you're walking through, in a way, a forest. Which is something which the Efteling, bringing us back to Plant Coaster 2, really does well, I would say. But then again, that might also be nostalgia talking and just me being biased towards the Efteling. Funnily enough, also just a quick side note for like the shades. Funnily enough, the actual shades, like I spaced them, I think, with the 5-meter angle snap, which I rarely use, except when I want like extreme detail, or I want to have not extreme detail, but like just having really concrete hands on just like trying to get this to line up as close as possible. Because if you don't know this, if you put the angle snapping or the, I think it's no, it's not the angle snap, it's the widget speed, I think it's called, I don't know. It's basically, it's the slider underneath the angle snap. But if you put that low, you have a lot more control over like the movement of things, because the widget of course moves a lot slower, so you have a lot more control over it. And if you do that with angle snap on, you're instead of the 1, it actually halves it to 5. Basically, you can put things closer together with the angle snapping thing on. This is also why I almost never, well, I've put out one tutorial once, but like I just can't explain things. Like that's just, I should get better at it, but I can't explain things without making your head implode. So yeah. Anyways, the fun thing with the shades was like, because I put it to 5 and the actual path for the wheelchair lift fit in perfectly between them. Like I didn't have to move, like the spacing between the shades was completely the same all around. Didn't have to move that. Worked out perfectly fine. So yeah, I'm very happy about that. Also, just a fun tip. Well, not tip. Fun tidbit about anytime I build anything in Planet Zoo, if there's water, the animals will immediately make a beeline for the water. The dingoes are an exception, but then the dingoes just completely showed themselves as dogs. And yes, I can call them dogs because sadly, it's very difficult to find a like pure dingo, because dingoes are able to interbreed with your regular dogs. So a lot of dingoes that you would find in the wild in Australia aren't like fully 100% dingo. They are usually mixed with like some kind of dog, which is kind of sad. So I think it's like only in like Tasmania and such where you would find a full dingo. So I can call them a dog a little bit, because probably the dingoes that they have here in Naturalis aren't fully dingoes. But, funnily enough, they immediately went for the planters. And I was just like, yeah, you immediately just want to terrorize the garden. You immediately just want to dig a hole in the planters. And yes, there's no planters anywhere in their habitat. No, I mean the planters to the side of the actual structure. They just immediately went for that, and then they immediately got boxed up for whatever reason, because, well, anyway, yeah, they shouldn't be there, but it was funny to just see them booking it, being boxed, being thrown back into the habitat, and then booking it to the planter again. I've seen that happen 3 times in a row. It was the funniest shit ever. And now we're building some shades for the dogs, because I wanted to have like a shaded area for the dogs, but I didn't want to have a lot of trees in the actual habitat, which kind of conflicts with my desire to want to make Naturalis feel more like you're walking through like a forest, or at least through nature. Doesn't really work if you don't want to have a lot of trees in your actual habitat. But because I didn't want to have a lot of trees here, I needed to find another thing to be able to give shade to the dingoes. Yeah, I decided to just build a wicker basket in a way, or like a sun chair, the upper part of it, and just decided, yeah, this is going to work fine, this is going to be amazing. Definitely wasn't really tedious to delete all of the other sticks and balls that made it up. And also then I had to find the center point, because I moved this thing, of course, so I didn't have a center point, because it was also half or like 1/3 of a thing, which made the widget thing for the finding the center point just not work at all. Because usually if you put like a, let's just say a pole on one side and then another pole in a straight line from it somewhere else, if you then select them all and do the advanced move, the widget will place itself right in the middle. However, with this thing it didn't, so then I was just like, alright, this is going to be a little bit of guesswork here. And then we have the rock work, which was actually surprisingly easy, because it's just like, yeah, let's spam as much stalagmites as possible, let's angle them a little bit, color them so that they look like rocks, and then add some rocks. Well, actually I didn't place a lot of rocks in this habitat. Like I placed 3 here, legit 3, and then I placed a few other of like the natural rocks, and that's it. A lot of the rock work in this build is just the stalagmites. They just work really well for having those like sharp ridges. Yeah, I think ridges is the right word here. Again, like my brain is so fried that it's just like, is ridges a word? It potentially is. I don't know for sure, but potentially is. But yeah, anyway, so used a lot of the stalagmites, the long ones. The small ones I usually use for like sand piles or dirt piles, because if you sink them into the ground, they just have a little bit more like texture to them, instead of like doing it with the actual terrain. Like having those small little patches where like maybe the dingoes dug a hole a little bit and they filled it in, like that sort of more disturbed ground feel, instead of just having a little bit of like a small hill. So used a lot of the stalagmites. Like the stalagmites are basically just the rocks to me now, then having some loose pebbles. But the main thing when it came to the stalagmites was the water side. Because when it comes to the water side in these habitats, they're usually artificial. Because ground or earth has a tendency to move where you don't want it to. And especially when it comes to like these habitats, for example, you usually have a shape in mind for the water. And if then the earth starts to like, you know, fill in a certain area and deepen out in another, you don't really want that. So I basically decided, alright, all of these like water sides need to be completely artificial. There's probably like, they're probably made of concrete or something. I left a very few small places with just natural sand, but then there's usually, or there's probably something underneath it to keep it in that place. And then it was just go wild with the rocks. The stalagmites, again using that for like heaps of dirt or sand, and just going wild. Also actually making it so that like the lower rocks are a little bit darker, just to give off the idea that it's actually deeper than it really is. Now, because this habitat also was venturing away from like the beach vibe and more towards the river vibe, I could also place a few plants in the water. Well, I put the green flat stuff in the water. I don't know what you call it, but it's basically just tiny green leaves, but they're usually in really big patches. They can like really completely cover for any like small lake or pond. But I just wanted to add those because I really like adding those to any water side. But of course, when you go to watch like a beach vibe, they're not there because that's salt water. Now, I'm not saying like, oh, the koalas and the little blue penguins live in salt water in Naturalis, but you want to give it the vibe that they are close to it. And so if you then have plants growing in the water, that completely nullifies that vibe. So I was just like, yay, I can put plants in the water here. I first wanted to put giant lily pads in here. And then I realized, yeah, that's a little bit much. So instead I just put like the green stuff that I put into a lot of like the sort of more stagnant water in Naturalis. Well, not stagnant, but like slowly flowing. Because stagnant water attracts mosquitoes. Mosquitoes we don't want. Mosquitoes are the bane of human existence. What are mosquitoes good for besides a food source for like other bugs? I think aren't mosquitoes like the largest bringers of disease right now? I don't like mosquitoes, alright? I hate them. Because they zoom around your head and then they're always the loudest when you're so close to falling asleep. Like when you're a minute away from falling asleep, then it's just like zzz. It's always that. Also, there's like, this is the funny thing. There was a spider that like crawled over my foot a few days, maybe even a week by now ago. It was like really fast. It just crawled over my foot underneath my bed. And I actually like, I pulled up my mattress because I was just like, where is it? Because I don't want it to like, that I wake up and the spider's just on me or the spider falls on top of me. I want to at least know where it is. I haven't found it. I have no idea where it went. It's just a ghost. It wasn't a small spider either. Which actually made me less afraid of it. Like the smaller the spider, I always say this, I've said this in the videos millions of times. The smaller the spider, the more I am just like, because then I think you're small, which means you're probably making up for it in venom. And I don't want that. But yeah, so I've never seen that spider again. I have no idea where it is. Maybe it will just drop on my face sometime later. Because again, I have no idea where it is. Fun tidbit, I also buried a dingo accidentally while raising the terrain here. You probably saw it pop up. Anyways, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button if you want to see more. Now, there's also the memberships if you want emotes. Anyways, that's going to be it for today. Hope you have a wonderful day, guys. Bye-bye.